They say money can buy everything, power, fame, beauty, but not character. And that's exactly what Alexander Pierce was about to learn. The hard way. On a chilly Monday morning, the sun barely touched the sprawling Pierce mansion. Its walls gleamed like mirrors and its gardens were trimmed to perfection. A world where calm felt expensive and emotions had no place. That was the day Clara Evans walked through the mansion gates, wearing nothing but a plain maid's uniform and a quiet smile. No one knew where she came from, only that she spoke softly, moved gracefully, and carried herself like someone who didn't quite belong among the servants. She wasn't like the others. She didn't gossip. She didn't rush. She worked as if every task mattered, as if cleaning crystal glassware was a sacred duty. To most she was just the new help. But to anyone who looked close enough, she seemed like a mystery wrapped in humility. Inside the mansion, whispers traveled faster than the morning coffee. "She's too quiet," one maid murmured. "She acts like she owns the place," another scoffed. Clara only smiled. She'd learned long ago that people reveal who they are by how they treat those beneath them. Meanwhile, at the top of the mansion's grand staircase, Alexander Pierce, billionaire, investor and heartbreak survivor, was already halfway through his second cup of coffee and his third argument of the day. Since his engagement had fallen apart 6 months ago, Alexander had become colder, harder. A man made of sharp words and colder stares. He'd stopped believing in people, in kindness, in anything that didn't come with a contract attached. He told himself that was the price of success, to never trust anyone again. Clara saw him for the first time in the reflection of the dining room mirror. He stood tall in his tailored suit, speaking to his assistant about a new investment deal. Every move was precise and powerful, yet behind his eyes there was something hollow. For a moment Clara's gaze lingered. Then his eyes met hers through the mirror. It was only a second. But in that second his brow furrowed and she quickly looked away. That was the first spark, not of love, but of something much more complicated. Hours passed. The mansion's rhythm carried on, clinking dishes, polished floors, quiet footsteps. Clara was assigned to clean the West Wing, rooms that hadn't been touched since Alexander's breakup. Mrs. Hudson, the head housekeeper, warned her softly. "Stay away from the study, dear. Mr. Pierce doesn't like anyone near it." Clara nodded, her usual calmness hiding the curiosity that stirred inside her. But fate, as always, had plans of its own. That evening a thunderstorm rolled over the city. Power flickered, lights dimmed, and Clara found herself lost in the maze of the West Corridor while trying to close the windows. She turned a corner and saw a slightly open door. Warm light spilled through it, soft and golden. Without realizing it, she stepped inside. It was Alexander's private study. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. A piano sat near the window, untouched except for a thin layer of dust. And there he was, not the arrogant billionaire but a man sitting at his desk with his head in his hands. For a brief, unguarded moment, Clara saw something human. He wasn't angry. He wasn't powerful. He was just tired. Before she could step back, the floor creaked under her shoe. Alexander's head snapped up. His expression changed instantly, from vulnerability to fury. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low, sharp, and dangerous. I'm sorry, sir," Clara stammered. The window was open. "I thought." "You thought what?" "That you could snoop through my private space." Clara shook her head, trembling slightly. "No, sir. I meant no disrespect." He stood up, his jaw tightening. "You're a maid. Remember your place." His words cut through the air like glass shattering. She felt them, not just in her ears but in her heart. For the first time she met his eyes and he froze. There was no fear there. Only quiet strife. Something about that look unsettled him more than any insult could. "Get out," he said finally, turning away. "And don't ever come back into this room." Clara lowered her head, whispered, "Yes, Mr. Pierce," and walked out. Hours later, long after midnight, the mansion had grown still. The storm outside had passed but Alexander was still awake, pacing, working, drowning himself in spreadsheets and regret. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't rested. His pride wouldn't let him admit that her eyes, that quiet defiance, had followed him all evening. He reached for his glass of whiskey but his hand trembled. The room tilted slightly. He blinked and tried to steady himself but his body gave in. As he stumbled, someone caught him. "Clara." She'd returned to leave her uniform in the laundry when she heard the crash. "Mr. Pierce," she gasped, holding him up. "You need to rest." He looked up at her, dazed. "You again? Why can't you just stay out of my life?" "Because you're about to collapse," she whispered. "Please sit down." Her hands were gentle but firm, the kind of care he hadn't felt in years. For a second he didn't fight it. Then as his strength returned, so did his pride. He stepped back, straightening his jacket. "I don't need your pity," he snapped. "Don't think kindness is your ticket to stay here." "I wasn't." "You're fired," he interrupted coldly. Clara froze. "Sir." "You heard me. Pack your things and leave before sunrise." The words hit harder than she expected. Not because of the job, but because for the first time in a long time she had actually cared. She bowed her head, eyes glistening. "If that's what you want, Mr. Pierce," she said softly. Then turning toward the door she whispered, "One day you'll wish you had treated me differently." He didn't reply. He just stood there, pretending not to hear her voice tremble as she walked away. Outside, the night air was cool against her skin. She clutched her small bag and took one last look at the mansion, the place that had judged her without ever knowing who she was. As she stepped onto the quiet road, the sound of tires rolling on gravel made her turn. A sleek black car pulled up beside her. The driver stepped out quickly, bowing slightly. "Miss Evans," he said respectfully. "Your grandfather's waiting. The Evans family board wants to announce your return." For a heartbeat the world stood still. The humble maid was no maid at all. Clara looked back at the mansion, at the man who had fired her without a second thought, and a faint, knowing smile touched her lips. "Tell my grandfather," she said softly, "I'm ready." She stepped into the car. The engine purred to life, disappearing into the night. Because Alexander Pierce had just fired, the heir to a billion-dollar empire. One moment I was a maid fired for caring too much. The next I was being escorted back into the world I had tried so hard to escape. As the mansion lights faded behind me, I sat back in the leather seat and whispered under my breath, "One day, Alexander Marshall, you'll wish you had treated me differently." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure if it was anger I felt, or something else I couldn't yet name. The Evans estate was grand, untouched by time. When I stepped through the glass doors, every portrait and polished marble floor reminded me of the weight of the name I carried. Grandfather was waiting in his study, sitting behind his oak desk, looking as powerful as ever. "Clara," he said without a smile. "You've finally come home." I nodded, trying to steady my breath. "Yes, grandfather." His eyes swept over me with quiet scrutiny. "I heard about your little job experiment. Working as a maid, was it?" I swallowed, unsure how to answer. I wanted to see how people live when no one knows their name. He leaned back, folding his hands. "And what did you learn?" "That people respect wealth, not worth," I said softly. He paused, then nodded once as though my answer pleased him. "Good," he said. "You'll need that insight. The board has agreed to consider you as my successor. But before they do, I need to see if you're ready to step into this empire." My heart quickened. The Evans empire. My inheritance, my legacy, my burden. "I'll prove it," I said firmly. "Not because I was born to, but because I've earned it." The next few days moved like a storm. Meetings, interviews, training sessions. Every hour was filled with expectation. Still, in quiet moments, one name echoed in my mind. Alexander Marshall. I told myself it was because of what he'd done, how he'd humiliated me. But deep down I knew it wasn't just anger that lingered. It was a curiosity. There had been something in his eyes that night. Exhaustion, pain, and pride all tangled together. I had seen more than the cold businessman he pretended to be. And that was the part one couldn't forget. The night of the Evans Foundation Charity Gala arrived. A sparkling event filled with polished smiles and whispered ambitions. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, wearing a gown that shimmered like liquid silver, every eye turning toward me. For the first time I wasn't the maid in the background. I was the woman everyone wanted to know, the heiress who had returned. The host's voice rang through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Miss Clara Evans, the future of the Evans family legacy." Applause echoed across the hall. And as I stepped forward, my gaze caught on someone standing near the center of the crowd. A tall, confident and familiar man. Alexander Marshall. The look on his face when he saw me, That was a moment I would never forget. His hand froze mid-motion, his glass halfway to his lips. For a second his world tilted just as mine had weeks ago. He blinked like he couldn't trust what he was seeing. And then, disbelief gave way to guilt. I smiled gracefully, tilting my head as if we were strangers meeting for the first time. "Mr. Marshall," I said when he approached. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." His lips parted slightly. "Clara Evans." "That's right." I held his gaze, calm and poised. "You look surprised." He hesitated, his voice low. I didn't know. That I wasn't just a maid?" I finished softly with a small, polite smile. "It's all right. Most people don't look beyond what they expect to see." The color drained from his face. He wanted to speak, but I turned away before he could. For the rest of the night I felt his gaze follow me wherever I went. Every time I laughed, every time I smiled, he was there, watching, remembering. And though I tried to ignore it, my heart reacted before my mind could stop it. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. Then came the moment I hadn't expected, the first dance of the evening. When the host called my name alongside his, I froze for a heartbeat. All eyes turned toward us. I could have refused, but I didn't. Alexander stepped forward, his hand extended, his expression unreadable. "Hey, he asked. I hesitated, then placed my hand in his. As the music began, our movements were slow, deliberate, careful. Two people caught in a rhythm they couldn't escape. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly, eyes searching mine. I met his gaze without flinching. "Because my name shouldn't change the way you treat people." He winced slightly, guilt shadowing his face. "You were trying to help me that night, weren't you?" I said simply. "And you thought it was manipulation." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I was wrong." I let out a faint sigh. People often are. For a moment the distance between us dissolved. The air felt charged, not with anger but something far more dangerous. When the song ended I stepped back and said, "I've learned that respect should never depend on status." Then I turned and walked away before he could see the conflict in my eyes. The next morning I was in my office at Evans Global when my assistant entered, holding a file. "Miss Evans," she said, "the acquisition paperwork has been finalized. Evans Global now owns a controlling share of Marshall Investments." I froze, staring at the document in her hands. My heart thudded once, hard. The company that had once been his pride was now partly mine. "Send the official notice," I said after a long pause. When she left, I sat in silence, tracing my fingers over the letterhead. Alexander Marshall was about to find out that the woman he had fired, the one he thought so little of, now had the power to decide his future. But revenge wasn't what I wanted. Not really. What I wanted was for him to understand, not just who I was, but who he could have been, if only he had seen me differently. I looked out the window at the city below, a quiet determination settling inside me. "This isn't about payback," I whispered. "It's about balance." And somewhere deep down, beneath the pride and pain, a part of me wondered if fate was giving us another chance. Not as master and maid, but as equals. If someone had told Alexander that one day I'd sit across from him in a boardroom, not as his employee but as his equal, he would have laughed. But there I was, sitting at a polished mahogany table, city skyline glimmering through glass windows, and him, sitting at the opposite end. He looked sharp, controlled, every inch the businessman he was born to be. But when his eyes met mine I saw the crack in that control. For a fraction of a second he wasn't the powerful CEO. He was the man who once told me I didn't belong. Now he couldn't look away. It was my first official Evans Global Board meeting. Every director in the room seemed cautious, watching me as though waiting to see if I would fail. Alexander spoke first, outlining a proposal for a new investment branch. His words were confident, but his voice faltered slightly when I raised a question. "Mr. Marshall," I said, keeping my tone steady, "your projections assume a consistent market trend, but we both know volatility doesn't play by the rules." He blinked, clearly surprised that I caught it. Then slowly the corner of his mouth curved upward. "Noted," he replied, his tone gentler than before. "You make a fair point, Miss Evans." Our exchange drew a few curious glances from the board members. They saw tension. But beneath that tension, there was something else. Something alive, magnetic, undeniable. After the meeting he caught up to me in the hallway. Clara, he said almost breathless, you were impressive in there. I turned slightly, keeping my voice calm. Surprised I could speak in complete sentences, Mr. Marshall? He chuckled quietly, rubbing the back of his neck. I deserved that. You deserve more than a remark, I replied softly. You deserve to think before judging people next time. He looked down, then back at me, his eyes softer than I remembered. That's fair. For the first time he didn't sound defensive. He sounded human. Days turned into weeks. And somewhere between tense meetings and business lunches, something began to shift. Alexander started staying later at the office. Sometimes he'd pass by my desk with 2 cups of coffee, pretending one was accidentally extra. He listened when I spoke, defended my ideas when others doubted them, and once, during a heated debate, interrupted a senior partner just to say, Miss Evans has a point. The man who once dismissed me now respected me. And worse, he intrigued me. I told myself it was just professional admiration, but my heart betrayed me every time our hands brushed over the same file, or his gaze lingered a little too long. One evening as I packed up, he stopped by my door. Clara, he said softly, I owe you an apology. I paused, waiting. I was cruel, he admitted. That night in the mansion I let my bitterness talk for me. I met his eyes. An apology only matters if you mean to change. He nodded slowly. Then I'll prove it. There was no arrogance in his voice. Just quiet sincerity. And for the first time I believed him. Weeks later, a storm rolled over the city, thunder rumbling in the distance as I worked late on a proposal. The building was nearly empty when I stepped into the elevator. And just as the doors began to close, Alexander slipped in, rain still dripping from his hair. Working late too? He asked, a small smile tugging at his lips. I could ask you the same, I replied. The elevator hummed softly until suddenly it stopped. The lights flickered, then dimmed. I pressed the button, but nothing happened. Of course, I muttered under my breath. Perfect timing. He laughed quietly. Guess we're trapped. For a while neither of us spoke. The rain outside filled the silence. Then his voice broke through, low and honest. I used to hate storms, he said quietly. They remind me of the night my mother died. I turned to him, startled. I didn't know. He nodded slowly. I was 14. I was supposed to be with her, but I stayed late at school instead. He had a heart condition. By the time I got home she was gone. The pain in his voice hit deeper than I expected. He went on, his tone softer now. After that I stopped trusting people. I thought kindness was just another way of being used. His gaze lifted to mine. But then you showed up, caring real. I didn't know how to handle it, so I pushed you away. For a long moment I couldn't speak. Then I said quietly, maybe life trapped us in this elevator so you'd finally say that out loud. He smiled faintly. You always know how to disarm me. Our eyes met, the space between us charged. The storm outside raged, but in that small elevator, something gentler bloomed. A fragile understanding that neither of us wanted to break. I could feel the warmth of his hand near mine, and for the first time I didn't pull away. We didn't kiss. But in that suspended moment something shifted. Forgiveness. Connection. Maybe even the beginning of something neither of us could name. When the elevator finally restarted, I almost wished it hadn't. Because the second those doors opened, the spell between us broke, replaced by the reality of the world waiting outside. Still, as we walked out together, he looked at me with something that almost resembled hope. And maybe, just maybe, I felt it too. But the next morning, everything changed. I walked into the office and the room fell silent. Phones buzzed. Laptops flashed. Whispered voices followed me down the hall. My assistant rushed over, her expression pale. Miss Evans, you need to see this. She handed me a tablet, the screen filled with headlines. Heiress Clara Evans seduces CEO Alexander Marshall. Evans' empire now controls Marshall Investments. My breath caught in my throat. Photos, from the gala, from meetings, even from last night when we left the building together, splashed across every site. They made it look like a scandal. Like everything between us had been a calculated move. My hands trembled as I looked up. Who leaked this? She hesitated. They're saying it came from someone inside Marshall Investments. The words hit me like a punch. Alexander. For a heartbeat my mind refused to believe it. But then anger, hot and blinding, began to rise. He had said he changed. He had looked me in the eye and promised to mean his apology. And yet here I was, humiliated again, accused of things I hadn't done, and betrayed by the very man who said he'd learned to trust. I turned toward the window, blinking back tears. Looks like some people never change after all, I whispered. The city below looked different now, colder, crueler. And somewhere across town I knew Alexander Marshall was about to realize. He hadn't just hurt me again. He is about to start what he can't handle. When I stormed into Alexander's office, I didn't care who was watching. My heels clicked against the marble floor, sharp and fast, like every heartbeat inside my chest. He looked up from the tablet in his hand, the one showing the headlines that had turned my life upside down. Evans' heiress seduces rival CEO to gain control. I slammed the printed article onto his desk. Congratulations, I said, my voice breaking. You finally found a way to humiliate me. He frowned, confusion flashing across his face. Clara. Don't, I snapped. Don't you dare act innocent. You leaked it, didn't you? You wanted payback because I made you look weak. He stood up slowly, his jaw tight. You really think I'd do that to you? I don't think, I fired back. I know. You said people like me don't belong in your world. And now you've made sure of it. He took a step closer. You can hate me all you want, Clara. But don't ever question what I feel for you. I shook my head, fighting the tears that burned behind my eyes. Feelings? You don't get to use that word. Not after what you've done. And before he could say another word, I turned and walked out, leaving him standing there. By evening my world was chaos. Investors were panicking, the Evans board was furious, and my name was trending for all the wrong reasons. I locked myself in my grandfather's office, searching through files, desperate for proof that I hadn't imagined the betrayal. Then I saw it. A chain of emails that didn't belong to me. Sender: Nicholas Evans. Subject: this should bring her down. My cousin. The one who always believed the Evans legacy should have been his. My hands trembled as I read every word. He had sent private company details to the press, twisting them into a scandal, and using Alexander's name as bait. He had done it to destroy me. But what I didn't expect was what came next. My assistant burst through the door. Miss Evans, turn on the news, now. On the screen was Alexander standing behind a podium surrounded by flashing cameras. He looked exhausted but fearless. I know what's being said about Clara Evans, he began, voice steady but heavy with emotion. But I won't let this lie stand. She didn't manipulate me. She didn't use me. She inspired me. She reminded me what integrity looks like in a world obsessed with power. He paused, took a breath, and then said the words that made my heart stop. If loving her is my downfall, then I'll fall 1,000 times. The reporters fell silent. The crowd was still. Me. I could barely breathe. This wasn't the voice of a man protecting his image. It was the voice of a man protecting the woman he loved. My grandfather turned to me with a faint smile. Looks like your young man just proved his worth. When I arrived at his office later that night, the walls were bare and the desk was half empty. He was packing. You're leaving? I asked quietly. He didn't look up. I resigned. The board wants someone they can control. And honestly, I'm tired of pretending this is still about business. He finally met my eyes. I lost everything trying to protect you, Clara. But for once I don't regret it. I stepped closer. You didn't lose everything. He gave a sad laugh. No. What's left? You still have me. He froze. And in that moment, every wall between us crumbled. I took a breath and said softly, you once fired me for being a maid. Today I'm offering you a position, in my heart. For a second neither of us moved. Then he reached for me, fingers trembling as if afraid I'd disappear. Our eyes met, and this time it wasn't anger or guilt. It was love. Pure, unguarded love. When he kissed me, the world finally made sense again. Months passed. The headlines changed. The scandal faded. And together we built something even stronger. Not just a partnership but a story no one could twist. Evans Global and Alexander and Company merged, not out of business interest but out of belief in each other. One evening as the sun dipped behind the skyline, I stood by the window of our new office building. The city glowed beneath us, alive and endless. Alexander walked over, took my wrist gently and adjusted the bracelet he'd given me. It's a little loose, he said with that teasing smile. I smiled back. Then tighten it. We've already lost enough. He did. And when he leaned in, slow, certain and full of love, the rest of the world faded away. The maid he once fired had become the woman he could never let go. If you believe love deserves a second chance, hit like and subscribe for more heart-touching stories.